Good morning, good evening. This is meeting number 6 of the Eden on EOS Chief Delegate Committee. I am Edgar Fernandez. I'm chairing today's meeting. I'm joined by Brock Pierce, Michael Sullivan, and Gracie Lau. Chuck McDonald is under the weather and has proxied his vote to Michael today. Today's agenda, I'm going to share very quickly so we can just go over it. Includes 2 items that were rolled over from last week, presented by Michael. One of them is to ratify Yves as the ENF president. The other one is to discuss further the areas of ratification of CDs, should vote upon each term. So points 4 and 5 are rollovers from Mike's chair meeting that we didn't have time to get to. Welcome back, Brock, as well. First, just individual CD updates, 2 minutes each. Not sure who would like to begin.
Yeah, I'm happy to start. I've got a very light update. So effectively, I've completed the weekly Treasury report, which I've sent to everyone. I'll just give you the headlines now. Total EDA members 421, which is a 1-member increase from last week, which is a 0.24% increase. Unfortunately, we've had a reduction of 5 people who have decided not to sit at the next election. I'm not too sure of the reason why. So that represents a 22% decrease in total election participants for July 9, which stands at 18. The Eden EOS account now stands at 204,285 EOS, which is about $263,000. The balance available is 181,000 EOS, which is about $234,000. And the unclaimed EOS from delegates is 22,459, which is just under $30,000. And I'll share this with everyone and put it out publicly, but I don't think I need to share my screen for it. The rest of it is the same, no other changes. The same risk is in place, obviously, given that we've seen a reduction in the value of EOS of about 12 cents from last week versus the US dollar. In other news, we've continued progressing the Eden Discord and Twitter Spaces, which have been run by Dan and Felix, who are doing a great job. And I've been working on how I can integrate Eden into my discussions at Davos, looking at potentially EOS relaunch or DAO leadership, things like that, because there's quite a few DAOs who are going to be present. And I've started to review the mass of public responses to last week's meeting. I've been reviewing those today. There's a lot of good opinion there as well. So yeah, that's me.
Thank you, Michael. Anyone else would like to continue?
Okay, I will be the second. And for Chinese, EDM Chinese, we are starting running EDM CN's Twitter, media, and Discord to provide more transparency. And then we will also offer more frequent updates in English so that people who are interested in what's going on in EOS Chinese community will be more ways to follow up and get in touch with us. And then the project eDAO is ready to take on tasks for the entire EOS community. So if anyone needs outsourcing services like simple code changing or depth testing or translation or something like that, eDAO can help. And Chinese eDAO will keep tracking all eDAO's work and all the team's process and make sure eDAO complete the job it takes for now. Because eDAO CM is not really get so much fun, and then in our treasury it's not really have so many tokens. So we are trying to find a way that we earn money and survive. We try to get the cash flow from the beginning. So that's what we are trying. And also I'd like to share something about the online shopping platform project I mentioned before when we are talking about community engagement. And it was also the project that get to the final round of EDMCN's first trial election. And this week I talked with some local factories. They are working on export business, and they agree with me that Web3 will change the game of online shopping. And the other chain cannot handle this, all this platform or all this online shopping things except EOS. So EDMCM might considering getting more involved with this project and see what will happen. And that's my update.
It's good to see everyone. I'm in Panama, and I don't know how big a role this is going to end up playing in the things we do here at Eden, but one of the main focuses, and an area that I think, because it's not flashy, but of incredible importance, Panama is obviously famous for its Panama Canal and the role that it plays in trade and global sort of supply and logistics. Panama's just passed crypto laws. It's just waiting on the president to sign and enact it. The president last night at dinner, gave his comments, and it looks like that may be signed into law here shortly. But we just think about everything that's going on in the world the last couple of years, and how global supply chains have had all sorts of issues. I bet the farm on the idea that if we had modernized our infrastructure around trade, that we would not have had the same degree of problems that we've had. These systems run on an old bill of lading, a letter of credit system, a lot of it being still paper-based, not NFT-based. If we modernize those systems, it would have a big impact. Another thing that is of grave concern is that global food production is down 35% this year because of a lack of fertilizer coming from Belarus, the Ukraine, and Russia. And so we're looking at global famine this winter. And so there's going to be, and again, there's more than enough food in the world, right? The idea that there's not enough is I think inaccurate. It's that we have a tremendous amount of waste. And if we modernized our logistics infrastructure, if Panama, Dubai, Singapore, and these places really stepped up and said, okay, we need to upgrade these systems immediately because of a lack of food, we waste more than 35% of the food in the world. So there is enough, and this is a very short-term, massive problem that is going to result in global civil unrest this winter, as in Game of Thrones, winter is coming. And so this is an area where I really want to be focused over the next 30 to 60 days, because this is about as much time as we have. And I'm really hoping the president of Panama takes a leadership role in the world in highlighting this. And I think that technology is the solution, but I'll take that offline. And if anybody in the EOS community or any other delegates here would like to engage in that conversation, this is the thing that is keeping me up at night right now, as I think you can tell. And it's an area where I'm prepared to instantly migrate all my time and effort. Sorry for occupying my 2 minutes with this one thing, but it's just front of mind, and it's occupying most of my thought.
Thank you, Brock. No, that's definitely an area of concern, and thanks for sharing your experience. On my side, it was a short week. We had a last meeting on Saturday where I presented our Eden Delegate accounting system, some wireframes, and the initial code behind it. We have now published that in the forum and are awaiting more feedback from the community on what they think and how we can improve it. I think we don't want to develop in a box, right? We want to make sure that we have as much feedback as possible. So we had our UI UX developer publish that on the same thread forum in the Eden community forum. So trying to get some more input on that, and as well as reading through and trying to digest the different opinions that have come up from our last meeting, from some of the proposals that were voted on and passed, from some of the comments that came from me and from Gracie as well, and really defining, what we're supposed to do, what we think we should do, and what other people want us to do, and really defining what is the current state of EOS, right? And what is Eden's role in that. So I spent a lot of my time, not so much talking, but very much listening and reading a lot of the comments in our discussion groups, and trying to, if you will, reach a consensus on what we're here for and what we can accomplish and want to accomplish in the short time we have together. So that's where I spent most of my time this week. I think that kind of puts us into the next agenda item, I will pass this along to Michael because this is his point from last week. We just didn't have time because there was a very lengthy discussion last week. And we can either decide to include this or not. But Michael, I will yield some of my time, if you will, to you today for these 2 agenda item points. Thank you.
Thank you, Edgar. I appreciate that. I mean, it's up to the group. My thoughts last week were it's important for us to make our mark on the EOS network. And it's also important, I think, for Yves Larose, the principal of the ENF, to have some democratic or to have a democratic mandate in place, should one be voted on today. And I think that will help the network overall to say that, yes, the chief delegates have viewed this and they've come to a determination. So that was the reason why I wanted to put forward. With relation to the job I think Yves is doing, I think he's doing a fantastic job. And I think it would be generally a massive upheaval if he wasn't in position he is in now. So I would hope that we would vote positively, but everyone can vote obviously as they see fit. But the reason why I want to do this is more about providing a mandate, but also to put into place a system that secures this position in the future, because Yves has already said he won't be doing this job forever. So I think it's important that we do have a process in place that allows us to stop a tyrannical leader of the ENF should one occur. Not that I think that's likely. But also the mandate that's provided will legitimize his position even further, and I think that will be a value add. So I'll let you guys decide if you want to take the vote. I think we should, but it's up to you guys as well. It's up to you as chair, Edgar.
Michael, just a couple of quick questions, since this is a topic of conversation for us. How often do we think these votes are, meant to occur? What kind of term, do we, this is obviously, we don't have the authority to make this decision, but I like the idea of a process where at least an organization, we're an democratically elected body, certifying or at least validating that role. Do we think this is something that occurs every 3 months with each group? The new elected group says, we think, yeah, this person's doing a good job or not. And I mean, I'd love your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I do. I think it should be a vote once per CD term. So once the chief delegates get into position, they can decide maybe after a few weeks to take that vote. But I think once a term would be good. I am concerned, obviously, it's quite a lot of renewal on Yves' position. That's quite a short-term contract you're kind of facing there. So I would be open to it maybe being every other CD group. But then I feel, the next CD group might not, that's unfair really, because it's about chance rather than position. So ultimately, yeah, I think it should be every CD term.
Well, I mean, there's I mean, the linking of the, Eden on EOS and the ENF through this process, and showing that these sort of two branches of, EOS are connected. We're funded by, I mean, the one issue you run into is just the fact that the ENF is our source of funding, and the concept of biting the hand that feeds you, and what does that mean over time? And since we talk about 3 months being such a short time, how do we think about that in the context of ourselves, right? We're going to have to go back to what are the recommendations we want to make as the next election occurs, as we want to make modifications to the bylaws. We've now agreed to this 3 months, but now we have a chance to revisit it, because it's now, should it be 3 months? Should it be 6 months? What is that term? And I imagine that, and how do you want those things staggered?
Yeah, I would add that that's not a light point, Brock, that you bring up, and we discussed it on the last meeting, right? I mean, the block producers fund and appoint the ENF in this point, right? And then we are now funded by the ENF as Eden on EOS, and then we're ratifying that position, right? We are also possibly influencing on the governance of the DPOS, right? And recommending, rating, and discussing the role of a block producer and, their job, how they're doing, right? So it is somewhat circular, right, in that sense. And that, we shouldn't just ignore that, right? That's how it's set up. I think, that was brought up in last meeting, and in some of the forums during the week, it was mentioned, well, this is aspirational, right? Eventually, the ENF could actually be the one governing and be on top of this. I'm sorry, Eden would be the one governing and be on top of this. But it is something important to keep in mind, and we can't just kind of brush that off, right? The fact that there is a linkage and there is somewhat of a circular nature in that governance. So I agree, Michael. I think we should vote. I think it's symbolic in a way. It sets a precedent for process. At least it brings it to the agenda to discuss and talk about, and I think that's positive. One question I have is, what happens if we don't, right? What if not just this body, but the next body that comes, there's a vote in place and there's a negative vote? No, we don't want to ratify this term. What does that cause, right? What are the consequences of that? And if there are no consequences, then what's the point of the vote, right? So let's say we don't say Yves should continue. Well, that's really up to the block producers, and clearly we don't have any influence on that. So it would have to be, some sort of reaction from token holders to then force that kind of vote of no confidence in the president of the ENF. But I'd like to get your thoughts. What happens in a negative vote?
So I was thinking about this, and I think the way you would safeguard it, and also this would solve the term issue, is that the president would need 2 consecutive negative votes to be asked to step down or to resign. So you could have one group of chief delegates that will maybe lucky to get into their position, or they kind of game the system so they could try and remove a particular individual. So if that was the case, then it'll be up to the community to ensure those delegates didn't get into position next time. So just thinking about it now, I think, yeah, 2 consecutive negative votes, and then the Eden as an organization would recommend that the president would resign. Yes, we can't force it, but we would recommend it. And I think if there's a disconnect between the community and the ENF, that would make that position untenable. And
thinking about funding, right? I mean, if we vote negatively on the ENF president that's maybe in the middle of deciding to fund us, and then sees this vote and says, oh, screw it, I'm going to pull the plug on that funding, and basically, cuts our legs out from under us, what do we do in that scenario, right? We're asking the same person that we're voting on for funds.
Yeah, I don't know. it's a good point.
No, I mean, again, why this very valuable conversation, and I would think, based upon the things that have been said, probably something that is worthy of further conversation. We took a while to ratify these documents. I think understanding the potential implications of a vote of this nature is probably worthy of further conversation. And it's probably the sort of thing that you'd want to do at the end of your term anyway, right? I think this is the sort of thing that you do at the end of your 3 months, probably not in the beginning or the middle of it. I think that recommendation would be, at least from Eden's perspective, we've been, in office, for these 3 months, and based upon our experience, based upon our findings, based upon our learnings, this is essentially our, analysis of the, of the president of the ENF. It's probably more the thing you want to do as you're going out the door, either if it's positive, more importantly, if it's negative. Right, so that the next group coming in at least is coming in with clean hands, right? You're not, the problem with having a vote midterm is, it could conceivably create friction that would paralyze the organization. And so just, we do this all transparently, but one of the things I think we should have, which we haven't had, is a separate group call, with all of the delegates of Eden. And it would make sense that we would do that probably 3 times over the course of our term, we should be having a call right after our election with the president of the ENF, introducing ourselves as the new chief delegates, and, to hear from the president of the ENF, what, they want to, what he or she wishes to share. The president, probably midterm, an update really from us. Here's what we've done. Here's what the remaining of our roadmap is. This is what we hope to accomplish during the remainder of our term. And then probably a closing meeting. I would think that considering how few centers of gravity there is in our ecosystem, having more official, and frequent communication between the two organizations is probably a best practice that we want to put in place, not just for ourselves, but to set back to a framework for those that follow.
Yeah, those are some really good points. I think a total delegate meeting makes sense. I think actually voting at the end of the term is a really good shout. We would avoid any potential friction amongst our group. So that's sensible. And I think actually, yeah, an ENF-CD meeting would be very helpful. And maybe that should be 3 times as well.
One thing I do want to add, just because I don't want this to be, for the record, just not to be misinterpreted. I agree with the earlier statements made that Yves is working very hard, and that we're seeing a lot of good things and a tremendous amount of productivity, coming from the ENF under Yves's leadership right now, based upon everything we see.
So, I mean, obviously I propose this, but I'm more than happy then, Edgar, to push this back till the end of our term, and then we'll revisit it, but maybe we'll discuss it again on one of our other calls in the future. But I'm happy with that.
And I would agree with that we move this agenda item then to the end and continue to bring this up, right? And continue to discuss. I think Brock makes some really good points. And possibly, does it make sense to invite the ANF and their board, including the president, to one of these meetings, not only to provide an update to us, but for us to provide an update to them, right? I think that would be extremely helpful. Michael, you had another point on part of the agenda. I want to keep this moving, discussing further areas of ratification, what we should be ratifying, what should we be voting on within our term. Did you have something specific? I know it's kind of general in the agenda point, but did want to continue to give you that time. We had allocated 10 minutes for that. I'm assuming that we're moving point 4 of ratifying to the end of the term, so then we can move on to this next point.
Yeah, so I was just thinking really, like, it's important to have democratic oversight for the key elements within our community. But on the whole, I think Yves LaRose is obviously is a linchpin in our community, and the way he sits with the VPs, the ENF and DPROS generally. So that's why I suggested him. I was thinking today about other individuals or groups, and I'm not too sure. So I would like to hear your thoughts on this as a team. But on the whole, I would like to be able to take a position on some BPs who aren't doing anything. Now, I'm not really an expert in this, but I'm hearing a lot that there's some BPs who don't pull their weight or whatever. But I'm also a firm advocate, if it isn't broken, don't fix it. So we make blocks, and that does well. We never had a really issue with that. The tech is problematic, and I'm sure Gracie will speak to that in a few moments passionately. But yeah, I do think that if we could review the BPs and make a suggestion that these guys or one individual or a handful aren't doing what they're supposed to be doing or should have an upgrade, then I think that would be a good position for us to take. But I don't think we're in a position yet to demand a BP be removed from the list or not be allowed to produce blocks or whatever. I don't think we have the expertise yet on that side of things, but I'm open to discussion.
I think that this is an area that, I mean, again, back to governance. I mean, if nothing else, what is Eden responsible for? If nothing else, helping to bring greater governance to the EOS ecosystem, right? To shine light on, the things that need attention and awareness. And clearly our system of governance is currently one, the block producers are our system of governance, right, at this time. And is that the right system of governance? I've always been of the opinion that The block producers should be the infrastructure provider, right? Now the ENF is elected by the block producers, but the ENF president is at least now call it the Treasury Department. So are the block producers infrastructure providers the ones that should be choosing the Secretary of Treasury type of persona, which is effectively what the ENF is? We're democratically elected, but really mapping out what that ideal system of governance is, right? Do we have a constitution? What does that constitution look like? What are the divisions, roles, and responsibilities? And how do we assess our performance? And if nothing else, advancing those conversations as much as possible during our term is the area where I feel we're most obligated, most responsible to move things forward. Anything that we can do in terms of development and execution and things that move EOS forward, I think is all a big positive. But at its core, what is the thing that we're the democratically elected segment of the ecosystem, not based upon anything other than our commitment to serve. And so I think that, this is, from my perspective, the area where I would be most disappointed in us if we didn't really advance those conversations.
Yep, I would agree with that, Brock. I've heard a lot from the community saying that Eden isn't ready to take up a lot of the roles I've suggested, and I think that's probably right. So what I'm presenting is really the first step of a very long journey. But if we don't ever take that first step, we won't ever start the very long journey. So maybe we're being overambitious in some areas, but I think true, crypto governance, true EOS governance is really what we're here to achieve. Now that's debatable. Some in the community might not feel that way, but I certainly feel that way. I feel passionately that that's what we're here to do, and I'm going to work hard to ensure that that's what this group does. And obviously, it'll be up to the community to either keep people as CDs who are also interested in that, or change them to other CDs at the next term. That's the beauty of democracy. So we should be comfortable to speak as we feel honestly, and not worry about being judged by others or whatever, because ultimately we're judged at the ballot box or at the Eden website or via the Anchor wallet or however you put it. So I just think that, yeah, we should really focus on defining what Eden is and what the governance layer of EOS should be. That should be our kind of core mission as CDs. Yeah.
I have some thoughts, but Gracie, do you want some time? If not, that's fine. I just want to make sure that you were able to
Go first.
Yeah, the point is, what other areas should we ratify? The block producers are, a big part of that ratification. Brock, you mentioned, they should be responsible for the infrastructure, right? That's what they should be, not a governance body, but infrastructure providers. Inside of that, we need to define, well, what is infrastructure, right? Is it just producing blocks full stop? Is it anything else? Because there is some difference, right? Most people, some believe it is just producing blocks full stop. That's it. No other infrastructure needed. And others believe, well, they are receiving funding inflation and are the right providers to do other things besides just infrastructure, right? So kind of defining what we believe the block producer role should be and what we're ratifying, right? And what we're holding them accountable to. Because right now it's not very clear. There's dissenting opinions on what we're holding them accountable for. And I think that's extremely important. I think, we've tried to implement a rating system. We've tried to, the chief delegates passed, tried to create a proxy, which then defines these block producers and kind of ratifies their position or what they're doing. And I think those are good, as you mentioned, first steps. And for me, I think it makes a lot of sense that this body be vigilant on the infrastructure providers and the custodians of our network, because that's exactly what they are. And also defining what are those requirements that high watermark or that level of accountability that we expect from them, because then we have clear expectations. It's very hard to judge someone without letting them know what's expected from them, as well as being vigilant against collusion, against sock puppets, against various structures that are detrimental to our network. I think that's important as well.
I agree with all of that, and my personal view is that the primary function is that reliable, consistent infrastructure, keeping the network running. All of the things that they do beyond that, I view are the reasons why you say vote for me over this other provider. But I believe those are elected actions. Yeah, that's not, in terms of how block producers should be held accountable or held responsible, is in reliable, high grade, best, it's all about the infrastructure. Other than that, it's whatever, I think most of us want to vote for block producers that are offering the network something more, but I don't think that's what we're here to measure. I don't think that's, where they're held accountable. It's like, okay, I will do this, and this is my passion. Here's how I'm going to contribute to the network so that we're getting something more. But I don't think that's where, that's how I choose which block producers I want to support vis-a-vis the many choices that there are. But the thing that is imperative is that they are securing and making sure that the network is running.
Yeah, I agree with that. I just want to bring up as a topic on this subject, and maybe Edgar, you can speak to this, and Gracie as well. Chuck, who's not with us today, said he would like to bring up the topic of Eden spinning up its own APIs. Now, I know both Edgar and Gracie had some issues with APIs in the past. It's not my area of expertise, but potentially maybe that could be a solution to some of these issues. So I'll hand it over to either one of you, or Brock, whoever wants to speak about it.
Well, before getting to that point, I think transparency also matters, right? I mean, sure, you can produce blocks, but if we don't know who you are and what you do, and whether you're offering just a return by vote buying, that makes, I think that's a difference between just an infrastructure provider and a transparent infrastructure provider, and also one that's using the inflation to buy votes, and one that's using the inflation to invest in better infrastructure. If that's their goal, right? If that's their number one fundamental mission critical responsibility. Also, at least compliance with a BPJSON of the way we can communicate with them in the case of a emergency, in the case of a missed block, knowing where they're located. That sort of information that's basic, I think, is not a nice to have, not a, well, they produce blocks, but we don't know who the hell they are, and we have no idea how to contact them. That, for me, is not enough. So at least, in my opinion, it not only is it producing blocks and running infrastructure, it's at least being compliant with the BPJSON that we need to have in order to communicate with them, in order to know where they're running and how to peer to them. Right now, we do have block producers that are not compliant with that information. So that's one of the areas that I think that we should also bring into that set of requirements. I don't think it's above and beyond asking them to at least identify themselves and provide a contact. On the issue of APIs, I think Eden right now is stretched thin. Like now we're going to run our own infrastructure, we're going to run our own proxy, we're going to run our own BP, and we're going to run our own APIs. I got some slack of like, well, why should block producers run APIs? Everyone should be able to run their APIs, right? I've been part of a team that's been in EOS.io for almost 4 years now, a technical team, right? And we still struggle, with finding the right infrastructure, reliable infrastructure. How are we now asking new entrants to, this is not the block producer's job. You should be able to spin it up yourself, right? And then having the response of like, oh, there's tons of options. Everything's fine. Everything works great. There's tons of APIs and it's super easy. Here's a Docker file, go run it, having Eden now do this, I think it's kind of like, you know, they want us to stay in our lane, right? Be ambitious with what we're doing. You know, now running infrastructure just doesn't make sense to me. I don't think that's something that we should be doing. I think we should be identifying, one, whether the people that we're already paying inflation to should be the ones running it. And if we don't agree with that and the community doesn't agree with that, then it should be someone else. And how are we going to fund them, right? You know, that was also the discussion of like, well, you know, the ENF shouldn't be the only source of funding for Eden. Correct, true. But right now, we're running an experiment in governance and running an experiment in how to use fractional democracy to bring value to a blockchain. Right now, I think we're spread too thin to also run infrastructure. Those are my personal opinion.
I guess to play devil's advocate and back Chuck's position a little bit, I guess we are kind of proposing to run some infrastructure, right? The Eden code base, Eden as an election software. So there are some plans to run some form of software and infrastructure already. I'm not suggesting, or I guess Chuck wasn't suggesting that we do it, you know, individually. Obviously, we would outsource that to the right team or the right group of people who could assist with us. But it would be, you know, an Eden API that was funded by Eden, I guess. Therefore, hopefully solving some of the issues with APIs. But I mean, I don't know how big a problem this is. Our API calls dropping off like all the time. Is the infrastructure crawling because of this? Like with BioWire, we don't seem to have these issues, but we're not running nodes or anything like that. So I'm not really too sure.
Okay, so it wouldn't be running it in-house. It'd be allocating funding to a third party to run infrastructure on behalf.
I think so, yeah. I think so, yeah.
Okay. I think that would be up to any chief delegate or delegate, right? If they want to allocate their funding towards that, I don't see why anyone would stop them, right? I mean, that would be handled by the election process, saying that's what I'm going to commit my funds to. I thought it was kind of spinning up a circle of an infrastructure circle where we're going to have and hire and maintain devs and infrastructure and servers or you know, cloud providers in order for us to run this ourselves.
I mean, it may well be. Chuck may have been positioning it as such, but I think that would be unrealistic. So I think that would be the only way to do it. Perhaps Chuck meant the Eden organization could fund it, and then it could go out to a third party or whatever. So it wouldn't have to come out necessarily of our individual budgets, but you know, with the new funding framework that I suggested last week, perhaps that could fund it, but not have its own dedicated internal dev team, which I think would be unhelpful. Just one thing as well, Edgar, I think what you were suggesting earlier with regards to BPs was probably a minimum standard or a minimum requirements for BPs to adhere to in order to qualify to produce blocks. I would imagine something like that is already in place, basically. But I guess as Eden delegates, we could define that. And we could define what the minimum requirements were, if that would be helpful for the network. But again, I don't know how big a problem this is.
Well, I'll just bear with me. I'm going to share my screen really quick just to give an idea. I think we can make sure that this data is correct, but I'll share my screen real quick. This is the EOSIO dashboard that we created and maintain, where we can see the actual rewards distribution and where they're actually headed by country, by lowest rewards, highest rewards, kind of a heat map of where we are. And also paid block producers that we can't locate because there's no BP-JSON. So basically, there's no country available. We don't know where they are. That means there's 20% of rewards, or these daily rewards, 5,909 EOS, are going to producers where, you know, we might know them, but at least they're not being able to be pulled through their BP-JSON, right? That's the kind of the BP agreement of this recording contract, and then this BP-JSON generator, which is how we kind of identify these block producers. So if we want to kind of quantify, well, how big is that problem? I would say a fifth of the, and we can probably hone down and drill down into that data. I don't want to say it's completely 100% accurate. There might be some errors there. Code is not perfect, but you know, roundabout I would say 15 to 20% of the rewards that we pay in inflation as a network, right? Every token holder is going to people we don't know or that are not compliant. We might know them, but at least it's not on chain and it's not able to be pulled. So there's an idea.
There's Michael, another thing I think that the biggest, kind of issue I see within the community is right now you've got permissionless happening. Who's at the permissionless conference in Florida right now communicating the value proposition of EOS? Who's presenting EOS alongside the other leading layer one chains? Who was at Crypto Bahamas doing that? Who's at Davos doing that? Who's at, who is publicly evangelizing and advocating, for EOS in the world at these events where basically all the hedge funds and all the investors and all the whales and everyone's going to get the update and decide what they're going to reduce their exposure to and what they're going to increase their exposure to. Who's doing that? And I think between myself, between Yves, I think between us, Edgar, I think that, you actually could be a very good representative. Zach Gall, Dan Larimer, one of the things that we can do is map out what are all the events happening. There's consensus coming up in Austin. We're not showing up. We're not representing ourselves to the external market. We've been too focused internally, on getting our stuff right. But the good news is I wouldn't have made the bet I made if I wasn't happy with the progress that we've made. EOS at this point is a forgotten chain that happens to be that diamond that no one knows, and I know when we have our internal stuff and what's going on at the internet, but the rest of the world doesn't know this. And when the world does report on it, the articles are not for our benefit. When the articles are being written on the EOS rebellion, that is actually not making us look good. That's actually the external people writing and laughing at us. Because that's not the story of how you advocate what we are. You have to talk about what's been built here, that it's battle tested, that it's been through, a process with the SEC. It's come out the other side. The governance is in place. The funding is there. We've got an EVM coming that's the best in the market in the world. But we have to get out to the world and start to shout from the mountaintops. You have to look at EOS again. I'm ready to start going and doing that, which is of incredible, it comes at great cost to me. I've somehow been able to maintain my sort of agnostic neutrality. I wouldn't be serving on this as a delegate. I wouldn't have converted all my block one stock to EOS tokens if I didn't believe in us. If I didn't believe in our potential. The problem is we're not going to convince other people to pay attention to us and believe in us and build on us if we're not out there meeting them where they are. And this is an area where, who's meant to be doing that? What organization should be reaching out to all of these events to facilitate those conversations? To make sure that we have our moment on the stage to make our case, to communicate why we matter, why as a layer one chain, this is something people should be paying attention to, building on, and taking a position, taking a stake in our future. We're not showing up. And, that's an area where I know, Michael, you and I are able to do something. I know that you and I are paying attention to this stuff. It's an area where I'm personally feeling, call it guilt for not doing enough. But this has been part of my process. Obviously I jumped in, all fired up and ready to go. And obviously things didn't go exactly as intended. And so I've taken a little bit more of a wait and see approach, which is the same approach that I've taken with EOS over and over and over again. I chose to do this, to make a further commitment to get further involved. So that we can have these conversations on a weekly basis and really get focused on governance. The thing that caused me to pause, You know, when I was ready to fire all my guns at once and, you know, explode into space, you know, is I became very concerned with governance. All of a sudden I'm like, wait a second. I actually was good with our governance system. Now I've got concerns about our governance system, and I'm not going to advocate for something I don't believe in. I have to have very real conviction, you know, and part of that is conviction that's created through our actions, right? It's the personal responsibility of, if you don't like something, do something. If you don't like something, vote, you know, get involved. You know, we're more responsible for the world that we live in than we often give ourselves credit for. And so, you know, that's just another thing that I don't think that we're ever going to succeed if we are not advocating for ourselves. The rest of the world is not going to advocate for us. You know, we have to go out and evangelize and advocate and promote and convince people of our value proposition. You know, why are we here? Why do we matter? And that's another, you know, sort of thing that isn't happening right now. And if that doesn't happen, nothing's really going to happen.
I would 100% agree, Brock. I mean, I think you need to take ownership of the narrative. And when you ask, well, who's responsible for that? I would respond, all of us. I would love to have all of us there. The ENF, representatives of Block producers, dev teams, apps, Eden, all participating, because it truly shows how diverse our ecosystem is, how many different types of opinions we have, and you know, strength in numbers in a way. We also need to be able to defend our critics, right? If we're going to be going up to these events trying to scream from the rooftops of our value and how battle tested we are, and we need to recognize our faults as well, and we need to be able to respond to those faults. So when people ask, you know, well, what's the deal with collusion between the top 21? What's the relationship between this INF and the Block producers? What's Eden, and what kind of teeth do they have? We need to have answers to those questions before we get up on stage and you know, talk a big game, because, you know, the worst thing that can happen is we fall flat on our face. I don't think we will, but we need to be prepared. That's my point. And I think it's a group effort. And I think that I 100% agree. And I would gladly and with honor and humility take the opportunity to represent our ecosystem at any of these events, standing side by side with whoever wants to do it with me, making sure that we're armed with the right shields, I will, and the right information to detract our critics, and also to recognize our faults and explain how we've learned from those experiences. One of the things that kind of came up from last call is, you know, I critiqued, you know, some of our current state at some point, right? And I was, you know, labeled as a fudster, as a negative Nancy, right? Someone who's not positive, someone who doesn't believe in EOS, someone who wants to hedge out of EOS, right? And a lot of the same kind of things that we see in mainstream politics, right? If you're not with us, you're against us. You know, if you're not with us, you're not a patriot, right? If you critique, and I think the number one thing about a democracy is being able to critique and to recognize our faults, to own them, and want to fix them. So us standing up here and pointing out flaws in our system and things that we need to improve on is not being a positive advocate of EOS. If anything, it's exactly what we need. We don't need cheerleaders that kind of brush our fallacies and our shortcomings aside. We need people that want to own our mistakes, and try and fix it. And so I think I agree with you, Brock. We just need to be prepared that, you know, we do have some faults, we do have things that we're working on, and everybody has to have kind of a response to take control of that narrative once again.
So yeah, I agree with that, Edgar. And I guess what you're saying is really the first part of fixing any problem is admitting we have one, right? and taking ownership of that. So in politics, what we'd often do is we would create responses to potential objections or pushbacks. And we can do that as a community, and prepare these documents and prepare these kind of arguments that can say, well, no, actually, this is because of X, Y, Z or whatever. And I think that would be quite a healthy position to be in. But I'd like to hear from Gracie, because I haven't heard much from Gracie in this meeting, so I'm going to be quiet.
I 100% agree with all you guys say. And then I want to bring up one thing that it's after I read of all the discussion in the group, the member group. And then I kind of like, they think like, is Edom want to take over everything, or what we want to do, we want to be the leader or something. I think it's, we hope, because Edom is for the governance of EOS, right? So we hope we can make that far, and then one day we can really governance the whole network. But now definitely we are not in that stage yet. And then I think the problem is we are not really want to just like vote, we get the vote, and then we tell them all the BPs are bad, and then we vote, we just vote for other BPs, and then we delete all the bad ones. It's not like that, because we want the power of the vote. It's we want a powerful process. It's because that we need to have something. We need to have the power to make all the BPs sure they need to at least do what they need to do. We are not dreaming. All the BPs will think, oh, we are not here making money. We are here to do the governance. We want to make yours better. You should do that. But if you are not thinking that way, okay, fine. But you at least should make the mainnet work as promised. It's really bad now. Yours, it's what we call, what the other people call before. It's like, we are Ethereum killer. We should be. We not if we are not working like that. We are not have, we all the economic here, it's not like that. But at least our technique and all the, when the dApps running on EOS, the feeling they are running, it's not this bad. If it's everything is like this, how can we say we are the last level of blockchain? How can we say that? How can we convince the community and other people believe of that too? I think that's a problem, that it's really something we should work on. Just like we tell people, EOS, it's like what, it's, they were not gonna believe it. They can try. They just need to run a few laps, and then they will know. So I think this is a big problem, that it's not saying that we want to take over, we want to have a process, and then all the block produce our own guy. No, it's not that problem. It's just like, we need the power, and then everybody need to really, we need to, yes, just like I said, we need to recognize our own folks, even in the BPs, and then we recognize them, and then we keep them, and then we work together. That's the point.
Well, we have a few minutes. I think this is a great discussion. It was kind of the next agenda item anyways, which was kind of discussing the future of Eden, the role of Eden, why Eden, what we can do to advance the EOS mission. And we had 30 minutes kind of allocated to that. And we have 3 minutes left here to conclude and kind of confirm the chair for the next meeting, unless anyone else has more thoughts about that. I think this is a continuous conversation, right? This is something that, you know, it is exactly that, a dialogue, a conversation, because every time we have one of these meetings, we get to kind of read the responses or engage with the responses.
Well, if we're going to continue in the chairing order that we did, you were first, and then we started alphabetical from there, which I believe would have me chairing again if we want to just stick to the same pattern, unless we want to change.
That's correct. That's correct. You'd be next. So the head chief delegate.
Michael, I can probably organize this, that we can do this meeting together from Magna Carta Island.
Yes.
We could probably organize this, that we can be seated together at the round table.
I'd love that. That'd be incredible. That'd be so cool.
An appropriate place to chair an Eden governance meeting. And by the way, if anyone else feels like flying to the UK, you're welcome to attend in person.
I would love to. I think my wife would promptly divorce me, so I will not. But
tell her it's not that bad.
But I guess you'll have a lot of off-camera time which is great. Usually the best conversations and ideas come from those. So I'm somewhat jealous of that. But correct, Brock, you would be the next in the rotation. We do have it on next Thursday, although we can switch that if that's not convenient, or if we can get you and Michael together.
I think it's very convenient considering where we'll be.
Wonderful, wonderful. So yes, we would be confirming then, Brock, you would be chairing the next meeting. If you can circulate the agenda if you'd like. I think, you know, this point of discussing Eden and our mission, why Eden, and the future of Eden for the next couple months that we have together, and also what Michael brought, what we should be ratifying, what we should be voting on, is extremely important. So I think we'll have continuance that thread. But Brock, you're setting the agenda for next week.
All right. Well, I'll be following up with you for any agenda items that you want, so that we can wrap. And this is, I guess, really we're at our halfway mark here, and so this is really kind of our term is going to be halfway behind us and halfway in front of us, and so this is kind of that middle marker. And really hope that, you know, we've completed all of our legacy work, and that we're really kind of, you know, now building for those things that will pave the way for our collective future and those that follow in our footsteps.
Yeah, 100%. I was thinking about this really quickly here to conclude is we want to propose some new bylaw changes, or possibly propose some new bylaw changes for the next mandate. And I think we're doing that kind of as we go. So it would be great to kind of go through Chris Barnes's notes of these meetings and then pull out what really should be included in a bylaw. And I love that these discussions can kind of flow, and then we can look back and pull out, well, this actually needs to go in a bylaw, needs to be ratified. And it'll make it much, much easier to have that document ready by the end of the term. But thank you very much for all your input and your time today, and look forward to the next meeting.
All right. Thank you, everyone.
Yeah.